Moving on to the field recordings, which sound like this. Within this group, we have 4 separate recordings. I'll take you through them one by one. Firstly is water coming out of a pipe, and this is before all the processing too. And then with the processing, the first two have identical processing, so I'll explain them both together. But firstly, here's the second sound without processing. And with. The sound actually comes from an air conditioning unit, but after processing, it sounds very much like rain. My goal with both of these sounds were to add stereo interest to fill out the high frequency section of this project. The EQ is removing what I don't want and emphasizing what I do, boosting that air band we spoke about earlier. The auto pan is moving the sound around the speakers, adding in the stereo width that I spoke of, and the crystallizer is then adding in the interest. More specifically, it's adding in 1 octave pitched variance of the sound. Upon playing with this configuration, I noticed that both sounds become overpowering in certain sections of the track. So I panned one hard left and the other hard right, meaning that when the auto pan tries to pan, say, the right sound to the left, it effectively goes silent for a couple of seconds, and what you're left with is this kind of yin-yang effect between the two. Check it out. I guess this was more inspired by No Such Thing than something I can attest to him doing, but I think it creates a nice ambience in this track. The next sound comes from a gas station toilet of all places, and sounds like this. I'm not really sure why I added this in here. It made the final cut, but I really have no explanation as to why. It kind of thickens out the track, and it's one of those sounds that you'd noticed if it wasn't there, but doesn't stick out by itself. You could also use white noise for the same purpose. The last recording is the sound that introduces the track, the field recording from the French street. I spoke earlier about the idea of a real world recording, with me then slowly introducing the synth under it to make it sound as if this was happening in the actual recording itself. You can see that I kept it pretty neutral. The only thing I've added is some variation in the volume and the pan with the automation. This was my admittedly kind of lame attempt at making the recording sound more realistic. Perhaps if you were walking down the street with things getting louder and quieter as the sound sources were changing placement in relation to your ears. The group processing looks pretty similar to the previous examples. The sidechain compression is there again to ensure that these sounds don't obstruct the kick and the snare that I would like sitting right at the front of the mix, just as no such thing would. Also quickly, this is what my reverb situation looks like. I'm sending everything besides the kick and the bass group to the reverb. The amounts each are sent are dependent on where I'd like them to be sitting in the mix. Field recordings right at the back, and the snare much nearer at the front. I'd also always apply a high pass filter to my reverb bus to remove low frequencies that I'd like to keep in mono. Reverb can make a track sound messy extremely fast, so it's best practice to keep the low end away from it, which should also help your phase correlation. Try watching a phase correlation meter on something like Span and see what's happening when you're adding in time-based effects like reverb and delays.